Okay, well, good evening and welcome to a special presentation on Broward County voter turnout for the 2024 election. And I'd like to express my gratitude to our presenter this evening, Monica Elliott, for her outstanding leadership as Chair of Voter Services. Monica also chairs our nominating committee, and she also serves as State Secretary for the League of Women Voters for the state of Florida. Andrea, Ronnie, for everybody on this call, definitely had a hand in everything that we did this year. And I'm going to now toss it over to Monica. And thanks again for joining us this evening.
Okay, well, thank you, everybody. So I'm just going to go right into sharing the presentation. And as some of you are familiar with, oops, let me back up one. Just make sure that you are buying those tickets and sharing the information about our spring luncheon. You can do it on the website, but there's also the QR code. We're really fortunate to have Katie Blankenship is going to be our speaker. Pen America is the organization. She runs the Florida office, and Pen American is the group that is behind some of the lawsuits trying to get banned books back on the shelf. And so people who have heard her speak on the State League side said, she's just really fantastic. So we're looking forward to that. And if you have any prizes that could be donated for the raffle, that would be greatly appreciated. And Iris Convisar is in charge of that. Okay. So now numbers, numbers, numbers. And that's what every election is about, is just the numbers. And so that's what we're going to be talking about. But the first thing I wanted to do is talk about the Broward County demographics and why we always talk about, well, we know that Broward County now is essentially 1/3 white, 1/3 Black, 1/3 Hispanic. And those are terms I'll use, white, Black, and Hispanic, because that's what's used in the supervisor of elections, the division of elections. That's how they divide people up. The other category would, of course, include Asian Americans, etc. But we're going to concentrate on, quote unquote, the big three. So this is the data from the 2020 census. And then this is also what was used to develop the county commission seat districts that we have. Our county is the only district that actually follows the Fair Districting Act within this state. And they're basing this on the 2020 census. So this is the total population, almost 2 million, again, divided 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. But then when you look at the voting age population, you're going to start seeing things shift, and that there are going to be more white voters than Black and Hispanic. Part of this is because the white population in the county tends to skew older, and so we're going to be above the voting age. And then you have to consider, well, who are citizens? And again, that's where you really see it skew more towards white voters, because the citizen voting age, as you can see on the screen, it's like almost 44% white, and then about 26% Black and Hispanic. So that last line, that's showing you the percentage of the population who can actually register to vote. May not mean they're registered, but these are the people who can register to vote in the county. But then we have to worry, or not worry, but look at who are the active voters for this last election. And I'm going to divide it up in a number of different ways. But here we're seeing it divided into the Democrats, Republicans, the no party affiliates. And again, you can see that we've got more no party affiliates than we do Republicans. And then the other are your other parties, Libertarians, Green Party, etc. And the total number of active voters was a little over 1 million. Now, what Joe Scott did on election day evening threw me and just, I guess, a couple other people into a tizzy, because he was showing we had a turnout of only like 64, about 65%. And I thought, this doesn't make any sense. And I called him and his PR person. I called, texted, and emailed, said, what are you doing? You're using the wrong number. And I have to say, he immediately called back and said, no, 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 I'm just trying to point out the number of eligible voters. And that's what you're seeing on the left-hand side of the screen. The number of eligible voters in the county for the 2024 election was 1,360,165. Eligible voters, that includes active and inactive voters. And it's those inactive voters, those are the people who haven't voted in the last two general elections, haven't contacted the SOE when the SOE sent out postcards or letters, etc. But they're still able to vote. All they had to do was show up at the polls and they would have been able to vote. So he was using, this is what they call a widget in the web parlance. He decided he was going to use this, and why, I still am not sure, but it's not what is used by the Division of Elections. So Florida Election Watch is the official web page for the Division of Elections when they're tracking votes throughout the state. And their number of active voters was this 1,143 blah, 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 blah number. So there is a difference between the number that Joe was using initially versus what was on the official website. Now, one thing you're going to notice is that there's not always consistency with numbers because there's a lot of different databases and they can be off by as much as 500 votes, but we're just looking at things in generalities. And if you've got a question, I can't necessarily see a hand go up all the time, but if you have a question, just speak up as we go through this. So again, at the top, we've got the active voters divided up by party. In the second line, we're showing the active voters divided by white, black, Hispanic, or the other group. And then at the bottom, we're showing the number of male active voters and female active voters. And so one thing I wanted to point out is that, Joe was pointing out that the actual number of people, registered voters who could have voted was about 1,360,000 people versus, and that was eligible, meaning active and inactive voters. Whereas at the top line, you're seeing the active voter number, 1,140,000 or so. So that's a difference of about 343 people. So that 219,000 number, those are the people who are going to get kicked off the voter rolls. Because, again, they didn't vote in the last two elections. They're not responding to the SOE. And they are going to be kicked off the rolls because that is what our law dictates. So for those people, once they are removed from the voter rolls, they have to re-register with the state of Florida. Have no idea where they're at. They could still be living in Florida. They could have moved and they haven't changed their driver's license in another state. There's all sorts of reasons why these people are not voting. So next, we'll look at the number of the number of people voting in the last 5 elections. So this is including presidential and midterm. The good news is when you look at the 2024 presidential election, is that the number of non-voters, in other words, the active voters who did not vote, actually is at the lowest level it has been. So in some ways you can go, Yahoo! But the problem is we don't have as many active voters as we've had in previous elections. And so there's obviously some people, again, we know that there's over 200,000 people who are eligible to vote but aren't active. But again, there's a little bit of good news. Again, it all depends on how you want to look at the numbers. So then we look at percent voter turnout for the last 3 presidential elections. And we do see a good trend in general in that the percent turnout did increase, even if it was ever so slightly, over 2020. And you can see the change in the Democrats, the Republicans, and then also the NPAs. They're all increasing, even if sometimes it's very slight. So at least we're not backsliding when it comes to the presidential elections. So then we look at percent voter turnout based on white, Black, Hispanic. And that's where we start to see that there's a problem. The total number, the percent voter turnout total is going up. It's going up for white voters. It is increasing for Hispanic voters. It decreased, even if it's slight, it still decreased for Black voters. And you're going to see that trend in some of my other slides also. Again, looking at the November general elections, how have we been voting over the last few years? And you'll see the number of total voted, the percentage who voted by mail, the percentage that are doing early voting, and the percentage election day. And to a certain extent, what's happened in 2024 is a throwback to 2016. 2020 obviously was the pandemic. Almost 50% of the people, when they voted in that presidential election, they were voting by mail. We saw that decrease in the midterms, and then it decreased even more for this past presidential election. Early voting, that again is almost back to what it was in 2016. Election day is still, it actually declined from 2022. So what we're going to see in 2026 and beyond, don't know, but it's interesting that 2024 is closer to 2016, back before the pandemic.
Monica, I have a question.
Yes.
That decrease in vote by mail does not necessarily reflect them not voting at all, correct?
Correct.
It just means they're doing it in person.
Correct. It means that of this 882,000, that almost 31% voted by mail. And then the rest either voted in person during early voting or election day.
Okay.
Okay?
Okay.
So then people are always asking, and I just got this data yesterday, and trust me, I do not do all the calculations for this. This is actually coming from All Voting is Local. But we see for the November election, the number of returned vote by mail ballots. And here it's separated if you're Democrat, Republican, other parties, or no party affiliates. And so the percent of total return vote by mail, the Democrats, and this isn't too surprising, had a greater percentage return than the other parties. And then the very last column is the number of people who requested a vote by mail ballot but did not return it. And that's not necessarily bad. I mean, the league itself, and I've argued this with Steve Busquet with the Sun Sentinel, the league itself, we recommend people getting a vote by mail ballot, but not necessarily using it. So the fact that these people did not return their ballot should not necessarily be viewed as a bad thing, because I get a vote by mail ballot, I actually use it. But I know a lot of you also get a vote by mail ballot, but you just use it as a cheat sheet. It's one way of being able to look at what is going to be on your ballot. Or when we're tabling, Andrea and I talk about, it's one way to know what's going to be on your ballot. Receiving that vote by mail ballot is a reminder that, oh yeah, we've got an election coming up. So you shouldn't look at those numbers as a negative necessarily, but this is just the reality. This is what happened this past year. So then we look at early voting, what happened in early voting, because that's where that was the majority of how people voted. And you'll see the total number of early voters there is over 428,000. And then separated out by white, Black, Hispanic. It's not surprising that there's more white voters doing early voting because we're the greatest percentage overall of the voting population. And then if you break it down, Democrat, Republican in PA, again, because we're a highly Democratic registered county, you're going to have more Democrats than anybody else doing the early voting. Now there's 29 sites that were available for early voting. And I know this violates every rule about slides, putting so much data on it, but it's just nice to really look at this all in one place. And I know from my experience, kind of running around the county, doing some poll monitoring, Southwest Regional Library, it was always slammed. Northwest Regional, Miramar, Weston, they were just always slammed every day. And you can see that they had 32,000 voters. So those kind of the four top. And interestingly, those were all in the western part of the county. You have much smaller numbers actually as you go into the eastern part of the county, and especially in some of the Black communities. I mean, some people would look at, well, why are we even bothering, keeping Tyrone Bryant library open or the Carver Ranches library, open for early voting? And that's because these are in either highly populated, Black communities or Hispanic communities where it's difficult. They don't necessarily have a car. Bus transportation may not be the best. And so we have to keep in mind why we might be having some of these early voting sites open, even if they don't get a great number of voters to their sites compared to the Western ones. One of the things that Joe probably needs to consider is more early voting sites in the western part of the county. But the problem he's going to run into is there's not a lot of county-owned or government-owned buildings that are going to be adequate for him to use. I mean, I don't know if anybody, well, the league has been like to the Davy Cooper City Library. They had 23,000 people. And if you recall, if you've ever been there, there is no parking. I mean, that place is just a disaster from day one. At least with these top four, in general, the parking isn't too bad. So it doesn't deter people. Now, I was at the Weston Library a lot. They do have a parking issue, and it's all associated with the high school because a lot of the high school students use the Weston Library parking lot to park in. And on the weekends, there's plenty of parking. During the week, during school hours, they ran into a problem. Miramar is kind of the same way relative to parking. They don't have the greatest amount of parking close to the library. Any questions about early voting sites? Maybe things that you've run into? Okay. So moving on, looking at percent voter turnout based on the Broward County Commission districts. And what you see in the blue circled ones, and then they've got red stars in the maps, are those the districts that had the greatest percentage total turnout. And then how that's separated into white, Black, and Hispanic. The blue circles under the category of Black voters, those are the areas that had the least percentage or the lowest percentage of voter turnout. Again, this shouldn't be surprising because we know from the overall data that there is a drop in Black voter turnout. And this is really the first time we are seeing this in Broward County. It's not really occurring so much in the Hispanic community, but you'll see some drop, but it is occurring within the Black community. Any questions about this particular slide? Okay. So one of the things that we had done many years ago, this was prior, as we were getting ready for the 2020 presidential election, is we did have a big physical map of those precincts. The precinct boundaries in the county commission districts have changed due to redistricting. So this is what the districts, everything was in 2020. And we had determined, what were some of the lowest voting precincts. White was the blue, black is the purplish, and then the Hispanic was the gold. And so we've got those two areas circled where we know there was a low voter turnout occurring. So when we were trying to decide, what areas should we target relative to the advertisements, not the posts, but the advertisements that we put out on Facebook and Instagram, we selected Commission Districts 1 and 7 for a couple reasons. 1, 7 is distinctly within that area where we had low voter precinct areas. The same thing for 1 and back in the Miramar area closest to the Turnpike or the Homestead Extension. But these are also the areas that had large Hispanic communities. And you can see the statistics there for Commission District 1 and then also for Commission District 7. Also, excuse me, we do have complete cities within Miramar, within these commission districts: Miramar, Pembroke Pines, Weston, and West Park. So we can look at these areas. At the top, we are looking at Miramar. And again, we see the change from 2020, that Black voters, it's very small, but it is a small decline compared to white and Hispanic voters. Pembroke Pines, we see the same thing. Here it's a little bit greater decline in Black voting. Moving on to Weston. It was interesting in Weston that there's a decline in voting across everything: white, Black, Hispanic. And this is an area with the largest Hispanic population for voting. West Park is a little shining city, and I just love what's happened there, because West Park in general it's a small, town within the county, but it always had a really low voter turnout. There's only 3 precincts there, and I'll show you that in a minute. But the percent voter turnout, huge change from 2020. And it's an increase white, Black, and Hispanic. And one thing I will note about West Park is that the league did hold an in-person candidate forum there. Whether that helped in addition to the ads, I don't know. So West Park, they really did rock the vote. And I want to point out precinct Q081 that had a 7.1% change in their voter turnout. And what's really important about it is that is the precinct with the highest Black percentage voters. And we have been working in this city, specifically Q082 precinct, because it had an relatively even number of Black and Hispanics. In 2020 and 2022, we did door hangers in that particular precinct. Now, we did not do that in this year. The other thing that was noticed by Jane Gross, who runs our Vote 411 program, is for the first time ever, there were people using Vote 411 in West Park. And so we must be making some inroads, into West Park. And I think that's really exciting. Again, going back to our map of the low areas prior to 2020, is that area in the middle of the map. And there you're looking at Commission Districts 8 and 9, and this is how they are broken down. Commission District 8 is kind of problematic in terms of how to analyze what's going on, because there's no complete city within it. It includes parts of 6 cities. Now with District 9, pretty much all of Lauderhill and Lauderdale Lakes is within that district. And so that's what we could look at. Again, what we see in Lauderhill is a small decline in Black voters, also Hispanic, but an increase in white. For Lauderdale Lakes, same thing that we'd seen before, a decrease in Black voters, an increase in white and Hispanic voters. One of the things we tried to do in Commission District 8 is we did mail the I Vote Because postcards to about a little over 1,000 people who were active voters between 18 and 30, African-American male, were in that district. They were also in State House District 99, and they had not voted in 2020 and 2022. Now, whether we had an impact or there, these are things that are really difficult to sort out. And the main reason is because these are new districts. We can't compare them to 2020 because these districts, everything was set up differently. But we also looked at one particular precinct that is bounded by Sistrunk, Northwest 7th, and Broward Boulevard. And as you can see here, we identified about 200 African-American males, again with that characteristic between 18 and 30. They had current voting addresses, but they hadn't voted in 2020 and 2022. And we mailed Yes on 4 postcards to them. This is how precinct R038 is set up and who voted. It's primarily a precinct dominated by Democrats, not too surprising. And then it's primarily a Black community. And so you can see the numbers there. And then the other thing, and you'll probably would see something similar if you looked at probably all the precincts in Broward County, is the percent turnout increases as you get older. And this is probably especially true, I think, in the Black communities. So what are the takeaways? I think what we are seeing is that Hispanic voters are indeed voting. There's always been this question, well, do the Hispanics go out and vote? And I think from what we can see from 2024, they are. And I would say, like, when we see Commission District 1 having the highest total percentage voter turnout, essentially, this is probably one of the wealthier districts. And so that's not too surprising. District 4, which is a predominantly white community, had an overall good turnout, but we see that the Black turnout in that particular district is below the 70% turnout. And so I've selected, those areas where you had a 70 to or less than 70%. Commission District 8, if we were going to focus on an area in particular for the 2026 elections and beyond, I think this might be one area to look at. It has the lowest total percentage and the lowest percentage of Black and Hispanic voters also. We also have in District 6, which it's about 50%, 2, 3, and 6. They're about 50% white, and then 25% Black, 25% Hispanic. And again, it's the Black vote that has declined, or certainly is less than 70%. We're going to stop sharing. A lot of data. What are the questions?
No question, but I do have a comment. I just recently saw a documentary and about voting, and one of the people speaking to the reporter was a young Black man who had served in the military and then come home to an area he'd grown up in. It was pretty impoverished. And he said the reason he didn't vote, being a veteran and all, that was the question. You fought for this country and you don't vote. But he commented that for generations, nothing's changed in their community. No matter who the president was, no matter who was in power in Washington or in Tallahassee or wherever, nothing changes. And so that was the reason he said he didn't vote. He said it just doesn't matter. And I thought that was just about the saddest commentary I've ever heard.
And I think I've seen a lot of, opinion articles, commentary that's very similar, to that.
Yeah.
Because they're certainly registered to vote. And up until this year, there was usually the percent turnout for Black voters was equal and sometimes greater than for white voters in Broward County. And so this is the second time we've seen this decline. And in some areas, it's very significant. Again, it's like West Park, I would say, if we could give out a prize, I would be giving it to West Park. Because whatever happened there this year, something changed. And I wish we could that's what we probably need to figure out, is what changed in West Park this year to have that increase in voter turnout that they had, because it was really quite significant.
Monica,
There any,
West Park-
oh, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say,
have
it's
you had
not
this
about,
conversation?
is West Park where they had, you said a town hall? Or that candidates showed up? Describe for me exactly what happened there that you thought maybe wasn't a coincidence.
Well, one of the things that we did have in West Park is that we did have an in-person candidate forum. However, we also had in-person candidate forums in Lauderhill. So we can't say that it's exclusively due to the candidate forum, because we actually did 4 candidate forums in Lauderhill. Andrew and I worked our butt off in Lauderhill. But what we ran up against in Lauderhill is politics. Because we had specific candidates who would not attend, and there was other candidates who would. And whereas in West Park, everybody did show up, there seemed to be, interest in that. I think Linda was there for that particular candidate forum. It was interesting.
It's always been a little gem. That community has always been a little gem. Back when Katie was president, I remember us going there to meet and talk with people. And it was just a gem, a hidden gem, as you call it. Yeah.
Yeah. But they'd always had low voter turnout. And, so maybe in a combination, they didn't used to have the early voting site at the Carver Ranches library. And so that may be helping them. But something has distinctly changed in West Park compared to other communities. Bonnie, I think you were going to ask something.
Oh, I put it in the chat. Have you shared the voter turnout information with the people in West Park? And was there a good turnout at the candidate forum? Was there a hot local race? I mean, I'm trying to understand what could have happened there.
It was a pretty good candidate forum. I don't know. There was maybe 50 people there, Linda.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah, and yeah, there were some hot topics going on, but in Lauderhill, we had over 100 at each of the 4 that we did. And so yeah, that's just it. To be able to put your finger on one thing, that's what's difficult to figure out.
So, Monica, given what you've done here in crunching these numbers and comparing, what you can compare, and I know there's a lot you can't. Would you say that this experiment with spending money on social media got results? Or you just still don't know?
There's really no way to really know that. because, you know, some people say, well, we need to register more voters. And yeah, there's still more voters out there to register, but that's not it. It's all about get out the vote.
Yeah.
But it's like what Linda said, it's not up to us. What's up to the league is to make sure people know there is an election and how important elections are. But it's up to the candidates and it's up to the parties to instill people that they want to vote and that there is a reason to vote.
We did retarget to lower precinct areas.
Yeah.
And so I would be surprised if we didn't get a lift from that, because that was what we did. I mean, for efficiency purposes, that was the opportunity, and that's what we went for. So I would be surprised if that didn't have an impact.
And again, it wasn't targeted to it was targeted to a particular age, but not necessarily to a particular ethnic or race. And so we did see Hispanic voting. I mean, that was, I think, when I started looking at this, we always think, well, the Hispanics aren't necessarily voting. It's like, well, at least in Broward County, they are voting.
And
And
we did.
overall, there's an increase. Sometimes it's slight, but there is definitely going in an upwards direction.
I saw there was a lot of information presented, and I don't think I saw if there's a change in the actual demographics of the precincts. So was there, like in West Park, more white people there than in the last election? It seemed like the information was all saying what the turnout was, but it wasn't showing a change in the actual demographics of each place.
The demographics, yeah, the demographics are pretty similar. There's only 3 precincts there. Neither have a very high percentage of white people that live in those communities. It's predominantly either Black or Hispanic.
But
and
there wasn't
really
a change there wasn't a change in the communities, a drastic change in the communities of the demographics within them changing. It still stayed pretty much the same.
It's a pretty stable community.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a pretty stable community. You know, it's right on the border with Miami-Dade. And sometimes I think people really didn't know that they lived in Broward County. I mean, seriously, because it's right, it's, you know, you cross the street and you're Miami-Dade County.
Right. Do we know if any of the precincts had a change in the demographics?
I'd have to go back.
Change?
Yeah, I'd have to go back and look, but just knowing what I saw, because we've been looking at this area since 2020, and that overall it really hasn't changed that much.
Thanks.
I think if anything, there might be a few more younger people moving into that area, but not a lot. Because they can, like everything else, they can't afford it. You know, just like every place else, the values of the homes are going up. Other questions?
I have a question, but it's like more broad and in regards of our neighbors, other counties. How do they compare this data? Is it consistent with what happened in other counties, or?
It's a good question. I haven't looked at it for 2024. I had done some of that work in 2022 as I was being asked to speak in other counties for the league. And because in 2022, it's kind of the first time we started to see a drop in Black voters. And I do know that that was true in Palm Beach County, and it was also true in St. Lucie County. So I don't know about that. Yeah. In terms of the percent voter turnout, we were right where we normally are in terms of Palm Beach was a little bit greater turnout, but we had a greater turnout than Miami-Dade. And then, the west coast of Florida, they come out, they're usually upwards towards 80-85% voter turnout in Collier County.
I don't know if Bonnie addressed this already, but do we know whether the local race in West Park had anything to do with the voter turnout? Like, I heard you say that there was a hotly contested race, but I'm sorry, go ahead.
There wasn't necessarily a hotly contested race as much as the candidate forum was pretty hot, because it turned out, I mean, I don't usually, you guys know me, I don't usually lose my temper. I did this time and told this guy to leave. And then I found out he didn't even live in West Park.
Oh my gosh, okay.
And
Really?
yeah, I mean, we had the police were there, everything.
Yeah.
I
He was a troublemaker. He came in to make trouble.
yeah,
He was a candidate or no?
he was
No.
not a candidate.
Okay,
No,
okay.
no.
He was in
So-
the audience.
But the candidates, there wasn't they were both hotly contested races, I will say that. But they were the candidates had been there before, in terms of we had 2 incumbents, and then the other 2, the candidates running against them, they had run before. So there really wasn't anything new going on there per
So
se.
so they were experienced candidates. So I don't know, maybe they invested more in their races. I don't know. I tend to find that Black people tend to turn out for people if they like them, or if they have like a good reason to turn out for them. They won't just like show up just to exercise their right to vote. They gotta really like the person, or somebody convinces them that they should.
Right.
That's just it. Yeah. So I don't know what's going on there, whether maybe they spent more on marketing, maybe they did more door knocking in their local races. I don't know. Who knows?
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised that there was a lot more door knocking going on.
Yeah.
It's a small community, and again, these were candidates who have done this before, and I think they realized if you didn't touch the person, you weren't going to vote.
They're not going to come out. They're not going to come out and vote. And I think Lauderhill realizes that too. And they also had experienced people that were racing, but Lauderhill's a little bit different. Yeah.
It was very interesting. It's like they are divided. That's a city that's divided in half.
Yeah.
And
yeah. And
I have to say, I do worry about Lauderhill, what's going to happen.
Yeah. I think there's a perception in Lauderhill too that they're just doing politics as usual there. So I don't know, maybe in West Park there's more of I don't know, they're more hopeful that things will change, because like the gentleman who was interviewed, he's like, well, if I'm going to keep voting and things are not going to change, then why should I keep voting, right? So yeah. That's all I have to say. I don't know if it sheds any light on the statistics, but yeah, thanks.
Yeah. No, I was just very pleased when I looked at the West Park to see what was happening. So there is probably a series of things together that help with the turnout. But I do worry about Lauderhill, because Lauderhill has distinctly divided themselves into 2 different camps. Other questions?
I'm sorry, it's Ronnie. I had a question. I had recently heard, and I'm sorry, I forgot his name, the editor of Sun Sentinel. He's been around forever, talking about how Broward, we should be worried that Broward's turning pink and Palm Beach is turning red, but eventually he was saying the statistics from his point of view were that that's going to happen with Broward County. Have you gotten any sense of some change like that?
Yes, no doubt about it. Commission district out west, it is definitely becoming, more Republican. And you see that in a lot of the different races, but like with I forget, I should know, but I don't remember, the district congressional district that Debbie Wasserman Schultz is in. You know, she used to win like by 70%. And now it's more, it's, you know, in the mid 50%. The Republican challenger gets closer and closer and closer each time. So,
Thank you.
and is that due to the western part of the county becoming more Hispanic, and the Hispanics lean more Republican? You know, that may be part of what it is. Okay. Well, thank you very much. We'll put this up on YouTube, so be sure and let other people know if anybody else is a number geek like I am. And thank you for sitting through this, because but I find it very interesting, and I think it helps us give an idea of what we're doing right, what we can abandon, and where we should be going next. So thank you. Take care.
Thank you, Monica.
Great work.
Thank